Welcome into another live edition of Locked On 76ers. That's Keith Pompey. I'm Marc Farzetta. Today we're going to identify the Sixers' biggest issue. Is it as easy as just saying, be healthy and you're contenders, or is there something deeper there? Also, Paul George's role, what we can expect from that 76er in the upcoming season, all that on this edition of Locked On 76ers.
You are Locked On 76ers, your daily Philadelphia 76ers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we do thank you for making Locked On 76ers your first listen every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Keith, we've talked about it a lot when it comes to health. We've touched on leadership. We've talked about the talent. We've talked about the incoming talent from this offseason, most notably VJ Edgecombe, their third overall pick. We're going to get into this conversation today to identify the biggest problem with the 76ers and how much time they have to solve this problem to be contenders. Also, Paul George's role. I basically want to identify whether or not people see Paul George and Joel Embiid in the exact same boat. We'll talk about that. And then if not Quinton Grimes, as this continues to drag out, and you've even admitted yesterday, I certainly got the feeling as well, this is taking a little bit longer than expected, but the longer it goes, the more it benefits the Sixers and not so much Quentin Grimes. But if not Grimes, then who? Who else out there that's still available, or maybe even on this Sixers roster, could elevate their game to help the Sixers try to contend this season? So we'll get into all that on today's show. First, Keith, when you do look at the health of this team, and you do look at the leadership of this team, and by the way, when I say leadership, I'm also going to involve the 76ers front office in all of this, not just on the court leadership with a Tyrese Maxey, a Paul George, a Kyle Lowry, whatever it might be, or a Joel Embiid. But when you look at the 76ers, what do you think is their number one problem, and is there anything that would finish a close second?
I think the number one problem is health, but the close second is the team culture. And it keeps rearing its ugly head. The culture was the team culture was exposed in that ESPN article for like the umpteenth time. And I believe that that's the thing that's standing in the way of the 76ers, winning the championship. And it's been that way for a while. I mean, the health issue, Embiid has always been injured. So, yes, that's number one. But number two, I would love to talk to, and that's the thing about that article. I felt like the article was very well written, and it was extremely deep. But I would love to hear what James Harden had to say about certain issues. What Sam Hinkie had to say, what Brett Brown, other people, Tobias Harris. I mean, guys who have been there for a long time. So to me, the team culture is holding them back. And I think that's a major problem.
Can Tyrese Maxey be a good enough leader to change that culture? Could VJ Edgecombe be fresh blood in the system to help change that culture? Is that enough to at least get it started in the right direction?
You know what? That's a great question. And I thought about that before we came on air. And you look at Tyrese Maxey and you say Tyrese is a breath of fresh air. But typically, a culture is started by the guy who has to be the man leading the culture, has to be the best player. It's kind of like you're saying, if Michael Jordan showed up late and did things, well, okay, Scotty, we have Scotty, you're a Hall of Fame player too. But no, it has to start at the top. So I think that what Maxey is doing is great. But at the same time, I think that, Joel Embiid has to lead by example. He has to be, and I get it, your knee is messed up, it's everything. But in order for the culture to be great, you have to have Joel Embiid get there early. You have to have Joel Embiid be visible. You have to have Joel Embiid lead by example to the young guys. Because as much as Tyrese does things, and he's the leader, when you have the franchise player doing things that maybe the team doesn't like and disagreeing with the team, you'll have young players and they'll say, maybe I want to be like him. Maybe I want to follow his footsteps. So I think, yes, it's great what Tyrese does, but I think it all has to start with Joel Embiid.
after that meeting, that infamous meeting in Miami, and Tyrese Maxey, it gets leaked that Maxey called out Joel for being late and all that stuff. After that, was there any change with Joel Embiid, or was it just agreeing to make the argument go away? Was there any change in Embiid after that?
I mean, I think Joel did come and he did certain things, but then at the same time, you got to realize guys got injured again. And then all of a sudden, Joel wasn't visible anymore. Now, that's not to say that that's not uncommon, when guys get hurt. But the one thing is, I will say this from a reporter standpoint, you looked around and you saw guys like Kyle Lowry still showing up. Paul George, until he had his procedure, was showing up. But there was a while, where Joel just wasn't there. You know what I mean? Like, he didn't travel with the team. He didn't do anything like that. So, as far as stuff, yeah, Joel was there. But then there was times when Joel wasn't there, right? So, yeah, but again, that's one of those things. That's a cultural issue that was established years ago. And it comes a point in time where that cycle becomes hard to break. It's kind of the equivalent of, both of us are parents, and it's the equivalent of, allowing our kids to jump on the couch, say, F you, mom, middle finger to dad. But then all of a sudden, when our parents come, their grandparents come in the house, you smack them and tell them you can't do this anymore. And they're going to look at you like, what do you mean? We've been doing this for the last 5 years. So to me, it's one of those things. Once you let it out, it's kind of like, once you open that Pandora's box, the saying, you can't close it. You can't let it back in. So that's the problem.
Joel Embiid, no more Nutella for you until you learn how to talk to your mother with respect. All right. Well, at least that works in my house. Here's something I was thinking about when you mentioned culture, and we talk about leadership as well. The thing that's so interesting about Joel Embiid is, like, I remember his first year playing. Ben Simmons is not playing. Ben Simmons is hurt. And I think that was maybe his second year in the league, whatever it was, when Ben was out that year, his first year as a professional, not technically his rookie season. There were the pictures on social media of Joel Embiid taking Ben Simmons out. And when he was asked about taking Ben Simmons out, he goes, hey, I know what it's like to sit on the sidelines and watch everybody else play. That sucks. You feel like you're not a part of it. So I wanted Ben to feel like he's a part of it. And now with Tyrese Maxey over the last couple of seasons, you really hear his encouragement of Tyrese Maxey. And for all the faults that we could look at with Joel Embiid, or not even faults, but more so just complaints about not being able to stay healthy and all that, the injury proneness and all that. When you talk about leadership, I understand not showing up to meetings, being late to meetings, whatever the case might be, needing to be called out by Tyrese. I find it very interesting that throughout his career, he's had these little pockets of leadership that I would like to see aid in changing the culture, but it all stems back to, I think, what is the number one issue: health. If he's healthy enough to play, then you're talking about a winning culture being instilled in the 76ers, one that is a true contender if they stay healthy. But the fact that you can't have him, who has been your best player, play at that level consistently because of injury, it's kind of hard to drive those points home throughout his career, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's hard. And the thing is, like, I've been covering sports. I mean, I've been at the Inquirer for over 20 years, 22 years, and been covering sports maybe 10 years longer than that. And it always seemed to me the higher the level was, like, once you got the high school, college, whatever, in the pros, the best guy was always the hardest working guy. It was a badge of honor, I remember a year ago, I was in the locker room with a guy, and he told me, this is visitors' locker room, and we were talking, and he said, Keith, I want to go way off the record. I said, okay. Like, you mean I can't publish it? I can't.
Way off the record?
Yeah, he wanted to go way off the record. Like, he didn't want to say a source said or anything like that. And he compared the 76ers situation to, other teams. And there was a guy on his team who people were extremely critical of. And he says, look, I would never come here. And I'm like, why? He said, because like, where I'm at, everybody talks about our leader. He said, but when we go out and party and we do stuff, we know that this guy gets paid the big bucks because he's in the gym. He's like putting up shots. You guys look at him and you talk and you say he's lazy, you say this and that, but we all love him because we know the work he puts in. And he says, I don't know much about Joel, but I wonder how much work is he putting in. Ooh. And I said to the guy, I said, yeah, but what about the injury aspect? He says, yeah, I understand all that. But he says, like, I just want to know that my guy is outworking me, not that I'm outworking him. And it was like, wow. And, so when we talk about that, yes, it's one of those things where you have the injury component. You have a lot of other things that happen, but perception goes a long ways to other guys. And when guys want to come here, and now again, the Paul George situation was different because he got the bag, right?
Right.
But a lot of these other guys, they look at situations in free agency. If the money is similar, it's one of those things they want to go to a place where they feel like it could help extend their career. And then also a place where you feel like you can win a championship. And then they base the other components on that. And guys around the league talk. So those were things that were said before. Now, again, this ESPN article came out. And since that ESPN article, I can't wait to talk to this guy when I see him this season and say, has that changed your opinion? But before, he didn't want to come here. He wouldn't talk about not coming here because he felt like the culture was messed up. And, he compared when you talk of Michael Jordan, you hear Michael Jordan, you hear of Kobe Bryant, you hear of LeBron James, you hear of, most successful players in this league. The one thing that they all have in common is their commitment to becoming better and their work ethic and things like that. And that's why they become the leader of the teams, why they make the most money, why guys don't complain about them taking the last second shot, because it's all about what you put in. Now, again, a lot of them didn't have the injuries that Joel had, but at the same time, this was a factor in this guy saying why he didn't really ride with the Sixers.
Let me ask you this before we move on to the topic, because I believe this. I believe that the Sixers are good enough to win a championship on paper. The paper, unfortunately, is got tears in it. It's all crumpled up. It's not looking so good. Basically, they stay healthy, they can win a championship, and that's how highly I think of Joel Embiid and his talent. My knock is the health. Now, can the work ethic go into the health? Certainly. Are the Sixers on paper, Keith, a good enough team to win an NBA title, at the very least compete for one?
I don't think so. And here's my reason being. Like, I think that on paper, they're top heavy enough to win a championship. Like when we talk about if Paul George is healthy, yes.
Right.
If Tyrese Maxey is healthy, yes, they're top heavy. If Joel Embiid, I think that you can compare those guys, the big three, when they're healthy, to any other big three in the league, right? I mean, think about it. You look at Oklahoma City Thunder's big three, right? You can argue with experience and everything else that the 76ers before the season, you would say that they had a better big three. No one knew Jalen Williams was going to be this good. Chet Holmgren, you're like, come on, man, Joel Embiid would eat him for breakfast, right? But I think when you talk about a championship roster, you have several guys who are extremely good, who come off the bench, who would be starters on most teams. And I feel like when you have the 76ers, you got to say to yourself, like, it's about the edges. It's about the perimeter players. Like, do you have anybody who will come off the bench and be a bona fide starter, right? I mean, on most teams. And you have to think long and hard and say that, like, do you have that? But at the same time, it's kind of like also another thing that teams have is that, and PJ Tucker used to talk to me about this a lot. a lot. Championship caliber teams tend to have even their great players sacrifice their game for the good of the team. For the good of the team. Just say this: when Kyle Lowry, when Kawhi Leonard came to the Toronto Raptors, Kyle Lowry was in his prime. Like he was like one of the leading scorers. He was getting all this, doing everything. Well, if you look at his stats that season, it's kind of like what he did is he knew that wasn't working in a way. So he altered his game. And when Kawhi was there, he just basically handed off the baton and was like, go cook. The Sixers have to show me that. They have to show me that they got guys who are going to sacrifice their game. So to me, it's like, yes, you got the big three, right? And Chip SZN Bird said, SGJ would cook Maxey. Yes, SGJ probably is a better player than Max. Well, he's the MVP. He's a better player than Maxey.
Yeah. But
at the same time, when you compare those big threes, they are a great and elite big three if healthy. If not, they're not. But I'm gonna say this: it's all about sacrificing your game and how deep is your bench. So that's what it is. So I don't see it with the Sixers.
Gotcha. All right. Teacher Got Game also said we got to stop being scared of health. It comes down to talent and coaching. We'll continue to take comments as the show goes on. We are live right now, so make sure you guys get in there. If you have an opinion, we'll try to address it during the show. This is Locked On 76ers. When we come back, we'll talk about Paul George, the boat he's in, and if it's the same as Joel Embiid. That's when we return on Locked On 76ers. And right now, let me tell you about Monarch Money. Ever wish managing your money felt easier? Well, with Monarch Money, it can be. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch Money puts you in the driver's seat, and it's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch is more than just a budgeting app. It's so much more. It's a complete financial command center. You can track your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to just managing your money, you're also building wealth. Let's say you just moved in with your partner, you just got married, you combine finances. Monarch Money can help you track all of that. Or maybe you're saving for a new car. Monarch Money can help you save money. Or saving for college for your young kids. Monarch Money helps you do all of that. How about this? You can take control of your finances with Monarch Money by using promo code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com to save 50% off your first year with Monarch Money. That's monarchmoney.com/LockedOnNBA for half off your first year at monarchmoney.com. We've talked so much about Joel Embiid's health. We've talked a lot, Keith, about Paul George's health and all that. You look at 41 games played by Paul George last year. How many was it last year with Joel Embiid? 19? What did he get to?
It was 19 games Embiid played in. Yep.
Are these two health-wise? Oh, also, and another offseason surgery for Paul George just for working out, getting it scoped and all that. Do you look at Paul George and Joel Embiid as two guys that are in the same boat as what expectations could be, what their expectations will be in the upcoming season?
You mean if those two agree, or do they have the same expectations? Mean outward expectations?
Outward expectations. I'm talking about like from the fan base looking into the 76ers, outside looking in. Do those two players belong in the same boat as far as the expectations of the fan base go?
I would say no. I mean, I would say no. I mean, I think that, this is the weird thing about this. Before Paul George came here, there were people who were a part of the Clippers organization, people who knew basketball. They all felt like that this would be a bad fit for Paul, right? Because they felt like, he's a West Coast guy, like chill guy, really nice guy. But they felt like because of his podcast, because of his personality, that he wouldn't be a hit here in Philadelphia, right? And when you look at it now, there are certain people who, they were upset with the podcast, and then when he finally gave it up, and now he's doing it again, and he's making comments about like, you go to Charlotte, that's a place, your career is basically over, stuff like that. So I feel like, whereas is Embiid, here's the thing about Embiid. Embiid has a solid fan base. Like there are certain people who, no matter what he does, they can't stand him, right? Then there's people who are like casual fans who are on the fence, and then they read this ESPN article and they fell in love with him. But then you also have he has a strong base of people who love Embiid. Paul George doesn't have that in Philadelphia at all. So you look at it, and there are certain people where they'll say, okay, Embiid was injured. Even though Paul George was injured as well, and even though Paul George had to get shot up to play games, there are certain people looking at him like, nah, he's just shot. Get him out of here. Wow. Like, you know what I mean? So when we say that, I'll have to say, no, he does not get the same he doesn't have the same expectations. I mean, to him, I think people just look at him as saying like, this is a guy who just came here to get the money, and he's done. Like, let's get rid of him as soon as possible. Yeah. He's not getting the same grace.
Yeah. So I'll say this. I've definitely heard both, which is what makes me ask the question. Now, I've heard that it's 2 shot stars. Forget about shooting stars. They're shot. Joel Embiid, Paul George, 2 shot stars. The difference is Joel Embiid has been here, obviously, for his entire career. He has that very loyal section of the fan base that he could do no wrong. It's all injury. You can't blame him for injury and all that stuff. And I can understand it to a point, but then I also understand the other people that are just like, it's over. Like, just call it. It's over. So in that sense, I think that they do look at these 2 guys as if they are done. But when it comes to the expectation, I think a lot more people, if they have to bet on a guy that is going to give you 20 points a game, that is going to give you 7-8 rebounds a game, if you're betting on consistent production over an 82-game season, I think it's a much easier thing for Paul George to accomplish than it is for Joel Embiid. That if I have to bet on either of the horses to be more consistent and more likely to play over 60 games in a season, I'm still betting on the Paul George horse, not the Joel Embiid horse.
Yeah. I can see that. The one thing that Paul George has to do that he wasn't able to do last year, and at times it was because I felt like when Embiid was around, they forgot about Paul George. Like, he went, because you remember when they played, but again, we're talking about playing Charlotte. Like, when they played Charlotte, Paul George looked like all-star Paul George. Like, he was the man. He had the ball in his hands. He was distributing the rock. He was getting 30 points. He was doing everything. And then I remember that first game that Embiid came back, and it was kind of like, it was Tobias Harris mode. Like, get in the corner, and we're going to have you as far as catch and shooting. But the problem is he never got any passes to him, right? But here's a stat that I'm gonna tell you about Paul, because he looked so much better when he was on the floor without Embiid than when he was with Embiid. In order for them to be successful, he's going to have to learn they're going to have to learn how to get him more involved, and he's going to have to shoot better. So in 18 games with Embiid this past season, George averaged 14.2 points on 41.2% shooting, including making 35 of 113 threes, which is only 31%, along with averaging 5.1 rebounds, 3.3 assists, and 2.1 steals. Now, this is where it gets kind of like, you're like, whoa. So in 23 games without Embiid, his average went up to 17.8 points on 44.1% shooting, including making 61 of 155 threes, which equals 39.4%, along with 5.5 rebounds, 5.2 assists, and 1.7 steals. So you look at his overall scoring average, his 3-point percentage, his assists, it just seems like, without Embiid, he was such a much better player. And when you asked him about it, this is what he said. I pride myself on being able to play in any situation, whether it's on the ball, whether it's off the ball. So it was a learning curve for me to kind of adjust to playing that style, talking about playing with Embiid. So I'm not surprised about the moments that it didn't look good. Obviously, we have to continue to work this thing out. But you know me, I'm always going to stay optimistic. And again, I think I can play in any situation. So it's just going to get better from this point. My thing is, it has to get better from this point. And they have to get him more involved. And he also has to get himself more involved because, and I get it, when you have more people, your scoring average is going to go down. I understand that. But we're talking about the shooting percentage. He has to be able to shoot the ball at a high level for them to be successful.
I was looking forward to kickouts from Embiid to Paul George and 46% shooting that he had from beyond the arc his last year in LA. And obviously those numbers you just rattled off there, Keith, it puts a little bit of a hole in it, unfortunately. Let me get a comment in here. We're going to get into the Grimes conversation coming up in next. Maple says, honestly, in my opinion, we have a better chance of going further in the playoffs with a team led by Maxey than Embiid due to the fact that we know Maxey will give us a constant base. I agree. If it is led by Maxey, I'm guaranteeing not making it out of the second round. Like, that's going to happen again. Not that that's the bar anymore. They'll barely be a playoff team. If it's a Maxey-led team for the majority of the season, Keith, and I've kept this opinion throughout, then I'm looking at this as a year to build to a year later of making it further in the playoffs. I don't see Maxey just all of a sudden taking over the team and then they're a contender. I don't see that. It would have to be a year, I think, that Maxey would need of being the guy in order to contend in the following season. I don't see it happening this year.
I agree with you 100%. I think in order for Maxey to be the guy on this team, they got to get rid of Paul George and they got to get rid of Joel Embiid. You got to go out there and get yourself a traditional point guard. Not to say that Maxey can't play to be the primary ball handler. But what I'm saying is you need to get a guy that's going to be able to get more Morey in spaces, right? The money that you have for Embiid and Paul George, you're going to have to go out there and get a high-level player that can fit next to Maxey, right? Because the way this team is really constructed, and they're trying to tweak it a little bit, but they're doing it with a low budget to make guys closer to Maxey. But right now, if you really want to be honest, it's centered around Embiid. It's set up for them to be successful if Embiid is successful. But if you want to build a team around Maxey, you got to get the guys in here, and you got to get high-level guys. You also got to get somebody that's going to be able to handle the ball, do a lot of other things. Not to say that I know he's a point guard, but he's not a traditional point guard, and he needs somebody that's going to take some of the pressure off of him.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. No, I agree with that. All right, when we come back, we're going to talk about Quentin Grimes. We touched on this yesterday. I want to get a little bit more into it now. When it comes to Quentin Grimes, this is dragging on now. This has gone further or longer than you and I both expected at this point, Keith. If not Grimes, then who? Is there a backup plan if Grimes ends up not coming back to the Philadelphia 76ers? Is it outside the organization or is it a promotion from within? We'll talk about that after this quick blink of a break. And just like that, we're back. What's the backup plan, Keith? When it comes to Quentin Grimes, if this doesn't work out, which is an avenue I have to start exploring mentally here to prepare for the season, if this doesn't work out where they're able to bring him back, and don't get me wrong, I want him back. I've said all along, $25 million seems crazy. $20 million seems still a little bonkers. It is 15 to 16, 17 range. That seems a little bit more appropriate at the most. What is the plan if Grimes does not come back to the 76ers as a restricted free agent?
You know, I think the 76ers plan is for Quentin Grimes to come back as a restricted. I mean, they look at it like, you know, this is one of those situations where, we have total control. Like if somebody offers him $50 million, then we're like, okay, well then you're going to do it, but there's no one going to offer him 50. So I look at him as a guy that the 76ers are like, you know what, this is the dude that we're going to take. Now, if there are other guys who you look at it there are several free agent guards that you can consider who are similar to Quentin, and one of them, some people may argue like, yo, I'm really enticed by this guy. And that person is Josh Giddey, right? Josh Giddey from the Chicago Bulls. Like, he's a guy that, if it doesn't work out with him in Chicago, what have you, whatever, he could be a guy that can step in and play well, right? He was running some point for Chicago last year at certain times. He was the primary ball handler at times. He was getting shots. He was baking the Sixers whenever they played him. Then there's another guy who is a lethal scorer. The only question for him is, has he really played in any meaningful games? And that person would be the Brooklyn Nets free agent, Cam Thomas, right? So, he's a guy. And then the third guy, a guy who I always liked, and I always felt like the 76ers should have gone after him because of his ball handling ability, because of his high basketball IQ, is Malcolm Brogdon, right? I felt like he was a good dude too. So my thing is, though, all these guys, they have good qualities, but they also have things that, that they maybe not. Like Malcolm Brogdon, for a while earlier in his career, people were saying like, is he a good locker room guy? It wasn't about him being a DH, if you know what I mean. And I'm not talking about designated hitter, right? It was just his personality, you know what I mean? Like one of those guys. But I look at those three who could be quality guys because, Grimes is known for being a great 3-and-D guy. He has solid defense. His offensive game was on full display. But then you have like Giddey, who can do similar things on the offensive end. Cam Thomas is a bucket, and then Malcolm Brogdon would enable Maxey to get off the ball more, like we talked about, and he can display his skill set as a one. So those are three guys that I like, but I do think that the Sixers right now, they're like honed in and focused in on just getting Grimes in here.
Jason A is agreeing with you. Screaming for Brogdon for years now. A couple other comments I want to get in here. Maxey is not what y'all think he is, not a top 15 guard. And then I think Chip Season Birds goes on to like list a bunch of guards to support his point. Good for you.
Yeah.
Where's Lamar? There we go. See you there. Thank you. Jason A, Maxey. Chip Seasons basically rounds it out. Maxey barely a 20 at guard, bro. So not too much optimism surrounding Tyrese Maxey, unfortunately. Keith, that's our time, man. Always a pleasure. Make sure you guys like and subscribe to Locked On 76ers YouTube channel. Breaking down the Sixers every day. Keith Pompey been covering your Sixers for nearly 15 years. Excuse me. Marc Farzetta talking sports with you here in Philadelphia for a decade and a half plus. Hey, by the way, thank you for making Locked On 76ers your first listen today. For your second listen, find Locked On NBA podcast, where there is no offseason. Doug, Matt, and Hayes keep you up to date on contract negotiations, rumors, and everything you need to be the most informed NBA fan. Find Locked On NBA on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. For Keith Pompey, I'm Marc Farzetta. We'll be back with you guys tomorrow, breaking down the Sixers even further on Locked On 76ers.